What if the one friend who understood you the most was the one you were never supposed to meet? I never planned for this to happen. I wasn't looking for it. But fate has a strange way of bringing two souls together, even when the world says they should never cross paths. The first time I saw him, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. His presence was massive, overwhelming, yet strangely calm. He wasn't just an animal. He wasn't just another creature in the wild. There was something in his eyes, something knowing, something that made me freeze, not in fear, but in wonder. I should have turned back. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I don't know if it was curiosity or something deeper, something neither of us understood yet. But in that moment, something shifted. He didn't charge. He didn't threaten me. He just watched, and I watched back. It felt like time had slowed, as if the entire jungle had gone silent just for this meeting. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling, not because I was scared, but because I could feel it. I could feel that something was happening, something I couldn't explain. I had heard the warnings, the rules, the reasons why humans and wild gorillas should never interact. It was dangerous. It was unnatural. It was forbidden. But standing there, staring into his deep, intelligent eyes, I knew that none of those rules could erase what I felt at that moment. Connection, understanding, a silent agreement that neither of us belonged to the other's world, yet here we were, meeting at the thin line that separated them. I should have walked away. I should have never come back. But that moment was just the beginning. This is the story of my forbidden friendship with a wild gorilla. I wasn't supposed to be there. The jungle stretched endlessly before me, dense and alive, pulsing with sounds I didn't recognize. Every step I took felt like trespassing into a world that wasn't mine. The air was thick with humidity, clinging to my skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant musk of something wild. I gripped the straps of my backpack, my heartbeat steady but alert. This place had rules, strict ones. No unnecessary human interaction, no wandering off the designated paths, no making contact with the wildlife. But rules have a way of fading when curiosity takes over. And maybe that was my first mistake. I had come here to observe, to learn, maybe even to help. Conservationists worked tirelessly to protect these creatures, ensuring their world remained untouched by ours. They warned us, over and over again, about the dangers of interference. Gorillas were unpredictable, powerful, and deeply intelligent. They weren't pets. They weren't meant to be near humans. But as I stood there, surrounded by the towering trees, the buzzing of insects a constant hum in my ears, I had no idea that I was already on the path to breaking those rules. I remember the first time I saw them, the troop. Hidden behind thick foliage, I crouched low, my breath caught in my throat as I watched them move. They were magnificent. Massive silverbacks, watchful mothers, playful juveniles swinging between the branches. I knew better than to get too close, but I also couldn't look away. There was something so deeply human about them, the way they interacted, the way they looked at each other. It was more than instinct. It was communication. It was emotion. But then, I felt it. That unsettling, spine-tingling awareness that I was being watched, not by the troop, not by another researcher, but by something else. A presence. Close. Too close. My breath hitched as I slowly turned my head. And there he was. He wasn't part of the group. He was alone. A young male, large but not yet a silverback, standing barely 10 feet away. His dark eyes locked onto mine, unreadable, intense. My body froze, every muscle screaming at me to stay still. I wasn't sure if I had stumbled into his territory, or if he had been watching me long before I noticed. Every instinct told me to lower my gaze, to back away slowly, to make myself as non-threatening as possible. But I didn't move, and neither did he. The jungle seemed to hold its breath around us. The moment stretched endlessly, thick with uncertainty. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I made the wrong move, if I broke the unspoken understanding between us, I knew how quickly everything could go wrong. But he didn't charge. He didn't roar or beat his chest. He just stood there, studying me as if trying to understand what I was. I wasn't part of his world. I wasn't supposed to be here. And yet, in that moment, it felt like I had been pulled into something far bigger than I ever expected. I should have left then. I should have turned around and never looked back. But something about the way he looked at me made it impossible. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just an encounter. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, far more beautiful, far more forbidden. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in that silent stare. A minute? 5? Time felt different in the presence of something so powerful, so unpredictable. My mind raced through everything I had learned about gorilla behavior. Don't make sudden movements. Don't maintain direct eye contact for too long. Don't appear threatening. But what was I supposed to do when he was the one studying me? His eyes flicked over me, calm yet unreadable. He was young, but still massive compared to me. His dark fur gleamed in the patches of sunlight filtering through the trees, his breath slow and deep, rising and falling with a steady rhythm that I tried to match. If he could sense fear, I didn't want to give him any. A sharp crack of a branch somewhere in the distance made my body tense. His head turned slightly, his ears twitching in the direction of the sound. My chance to leave. My moment to walk away before this went too far. But something in me refused to move. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was awe, or maybe, just maybe, I already felt something pulling me toward him, something unspoken that neither of us fully understood yet. Then he took a step forward. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to stay still. I wasn't supposed to be this close. I wasn't supposed to be here at all. But for some reason, I wasn't afraid. His movements weren't aggressive. There was no show of dominance, no warning signs that I was in immediate danger. He was just approaching, testing the space between us. I swallowed hard, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs as he closed the distance. His presence was overwhelming, every muscle in his massive body shifting with effortless power. He could end me in an instant if he wanted to. But he didn't. He stopped just a few feet away, his breath now audible, deep and steady. And then, something happened that I never expected. He lowered himself slightly, his gaze never leaving mine, and he reached out. Not in an attack, not in aggression. Just a slow, deliberate movement of his hand, as if he were trying to understand what I was. My body was frozen, my mind racing. Was this curiosity? A test? A warning? Every instinct told me to step back, to leave before this moment turned into something uncontrollable. But I didn't move. Instead, slowly, carefully, I lifted my own hand. For a second, for just the briefest, most fragile moment, I thought, maybe, just maybe, this wild creature saw me as something more than an outsider. And then, just as quickly as it began, the moment shattered. A loud call echoed through the trees, distant but sharp, and his head snapped up. His posture changed instantly, muscles tensing, eyes darkening with alertness. He turned away from me, scanning the jungle, his body now completely different. Focused. Ready. Before I could even process what was happening, he was gone. Vanished into the dense green, leaving nothing but silence in his wake. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. My legs felt weak, my hands shaking, but my heart was racing with something else now. Not fear, not relief. Something far more dangerous. I wanted to see him again. I didn't know if I would ever see him again. Maybe it had been a fluke, a rare and fleeting moment where our worlds had accidentally collided. But something inside me told me otherwise. He had looked at me with a kind of awareness I couldn't ignore, a curiosity that mirrored my own. And as the days passed, I found myself drawn back to the same place, lingering at the edge of the jungle longer than I should have, searching for any sign that he was still out there. And then, one day, he was. I had been sitting on a fallen tree, my fingers idly tracing patterns in the dirt, when I felt it, that familiar, unmistakable sensation of being watched. My breath hitched as I slowly turned my head, and there he was, standing just beyond the clearing, half hidden by thick foliage. He wasn't moving, just watching. A strange mix of relief and exhilaration surged through me. He remembered me. He had come back. But what did that mean? Was he curious? Cautious? Testing me? I didn't know, but I stayed still, giving him the choice. Minutes passed, and then, cautiously, he stepped forward. This time, I wasn't paralyzed with uncertainty. I let him move at his own pace, watching as he closed the distance between us with slow, deliberate steps. Every movement was careful, measured. There was no fear in his eyes, no aggression, only curiosity. Day after day, this became our pattern. He would appear, always watching at first, and I would wait. Sometimes he would inch closer. Sometimes he would keep his distance. But slowly, undeniably, the gap between us grew smaller. One day, I brought a piece of fruit with me, setting it down a few feet away before retreating. He eyed it warily at first. Then, after what felt like forever, he reached out, scooping it up with his massive fingers. I held my breath as he examined it, sniffing before finally taking a slow, deliberate bite. My heart pounded. He trusted me enough to accept something from me. It wasn't just about the fruit. It was about something deeper, an unspoken understanding, a fragile thread of trust beginning to form. And as time went on, that trust only grew. He let me be near him, closer than I ever imagined possible. Sometimes he would sit in silence, simply existing in the same space as me. Other times he would observe me with a look that felt almost knowing. But the more I saw him, the more I realized just how dangerous this bond was becoming. He was still a wild animal. I was still a human who didn't belong in his world. And if anyone discovered what was happening between us, I knew the consequences wouldn't just fall on me. I was breaking the rules, and sooner or later, someone would find out. The first time I felt the weight of what I was doing, it wasn't fear that hit me first, it was guilt. I knew the rules. I knew that human interaction with wild gorillas could lead to disaster, not just for me, but for him. If he grew too comfortable with people, he could lose his natural instincts, become too trusting. And in a world where not all humans had good intentions, that could mean danger. For both of us. But even knowing that, I kept coming back. I told myself I was being careful, that I was keeping my distance when needed, that I wasn't interfering too much. But deep down, I knew that line had already blurred. And then, one day, it happened. I heard voices, not from the jungle, from people. I had been sitting near him, watching as he pulled apart a piece of fruit with slow, methodical movements, when the distant sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush sent a chill down my spine. My body went rigid. I wasn't supposed to be out this far, and I definitely wasn't supposed to be this close to a gorilla. If someone saw us together, there would be no explaining it away. His head snapped up, muscles tensing. He heard it too. His dark eyes flicked to mine for a split second before he turned, scanning the trees. I could feel the energy in the air shift. He wasn't afraid, but he was alert. I, on the other hand, was terrified. The voices grew louder, closer. My mind raced. What would they do if they saw me here? Would they think I was stupid? Reckless? Would they try to chase him off? Worse, would they try to capture him, relocate him, punish him for something that wasn't his fault? I knew I had to move, but I didn't want to startle him. Slowly, carefully, I began to inch backward, hoping he would do the same. But he didn't. He stayed where he was, still as stone, his eyes fixed in the direction of the approaching sounds. Then, just as the voices reached their loudest, he made his decision. With a powerful push, he vanished into the jungle, melting into the shadows as if he had never been there at all. My breath came fast and uneven, my heart hammering as I turned and hurried in the opposite direction, slipping away before I could be seen. For the rest of the day, my mind was in chaos. I had always known this wasn't just a harmless friendship, but this was the closest I had come to being caught. And if I wasn't careful, the next time, I wouldn't be so lucky. I needed to stop. I needed to walk away. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if I could. I told myself it was over, that I wouldn't go back, that I couldn't. For days I avoided the jungle, forcing myself to stay away. Every time I felt the pull, the need to return, I reminded myself of what almost happened. The voices, the risk, the consequences. If anyone discovered what I had been doing, it wouldn't just be me facing the fallout, it would be him. Wild gorillas who grew too comfortable around humans often met terrible fates. Some were relocated, torn from their homes because they were seen as a danger. Others weren't given that chance, and I refused to let that happen to him. But no matter how hard I tried to push him from my mind, he never left. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. The way he watched me, the way he studied me as if he understood more than I ever could. And worst of all, I wondered if he was waiting. Days turned into a week, then another. I went about my routine, but nothing felt the same. The jungle that had once felt like home now felt like a place I was forbidden from entering, a space I had no right to return to. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. One evening, just before sunset, I finally gave in. I told myself I wasn't going to look for him, that I just needed to see the jungle again, to remind myself why I had to let go. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't there for the trees or the sounds of the forest. I was searching. And then, I felt it. That familiar, unmistakable presence. The feeling of being watched. My breath hitched as I turned, my heart racing. And there he was. He stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows, just like before. But this time, something was different. He wasn't just watching. He was waiting. A lump formed in my throat. How long had he been coming here? Had he searched for me like I had searched for him? I wanted to believe it was just coincidence, that I was imagining the connection between us. But in that moment, I knew the truth. I wasn't the only one who couldn't walk away. I don't know what I expected when I saw him again. Relief, guilt, fear, maybe all of it at once. But what I felt most was certainty. A deep, undeniable truth settled in my chest. I couldn't leave him behind. He had been waiting. Whether by instinct or something deeper, he had returned, just like I had. And now, as we stood there once again, facing each other in the fading light, I knew there was no turning back. Slowly, cautiously, I took a step forward. He didn't move. His dark eyes remained locked onto mine, calm but focused, watching, always watching. I could feel my heart pounding, not with fear, but with something else entirely. This wasn't just a wild animal before me. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a bond. One that neither of us had chosen, yet here we were, unable to break it. I knelt down, lowering myself to his level, showing him I meant no harm. He shifted slightly, muscles rippling beneath his thick fur, and for a moment, I thought he might turn and disappear again. But then, he did something I never expected. He moved closer, not fast, not threatening, just a slow, deliberate step. Then another. My breath caught in my throat. He had never come this close before. Every part of me screamed to stay still, to not ruin whatever fragile trust had formed between us. He stopped just a few feet away, his massive presence overwhelming, and then, ever so slightly, he lowered his head. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. It was a gesture I recognized, one of peace, of acceptance. I had seen gorillas do it with each other, a sign that there was no threat, no reason to fear. And now, he was doing it for me. Without thinking, without hesitation, I slowly reached out my hand, palm up, not touching him, just offering. He looked at it. Then, with a patience that felt almost human, he reached forward and brushed his massive fingers against mine. A shock ran through me, not from fear, but from something much deeper. Connection, understanding, a silent agreement that went beyond words, beyond species, beyond the rules that said this should never happen. At that moment, I knew. This wasn't just a wild encounter. This wasn't just a mistake I had made. This was real, and it was forbidden. But I wasn't willing to let it go. Days turned into weeks, and our unspoken bond only grew stronger. Every evening, when the sky turned soft with the colors of dusk, I found myself drawn back to the jungle's edge, my heart racing with anticipation, and every time, without fail, he was there, waiting. It was no longer just chance, it was routine. A silent promise neither of us had spoken but both understood. He trusted me now, in a way I never imagined possible. He no longer watched from the shadows or hesitated before approaching. He moved freely in my presence, unafraid, as if I belonged in his world. I learned his habits, the way he would sit, legs stretched out, arms draped over his knees, watching the trees sway above us. The way he would tilt his head slightly when he was curious, his dark eyes flicking to me as if asking a silent question. The way he would sometimes let out a soft, rumbling sound, a sound I had once heard only between his kind. It was contentment, comfort, maybe even friendship. I knew it couldn't last. There was no way this could go unnoticed forever. I was being reckless, breaking the very rules put in place to protect creatures like him. If anyone found out, if they saw how close we had become, it wouldn't be seen as something beautiful. It would be seen as dangerous, and he would be the one to pay the price. I tried to convince myself to stop, to turn back before it was too late. But every time I looked into his eyes, I knew I wouldn't. Maybe I was selfish, maybe I was naive, but I wasn't ready to let go. Then, one night, something changed. I was sitting on the ground, my back against a tree, watching as he lazily plucked at a vine nearby. The jungle was quiet, peaceful. And then, he moved closer. Closer than ever before. I froze, my breath catching as he reached out, his massive fingers grazing my arm with deliberate gentleness. It was brief, barely a second. But in that moment, it was as if he was telling me something. As if he understood, even more than I did, that this, whatever this was real. I should have felt joy, wonder. But instead, a cold weight settled in my chest. Because now, there was no denying it. I had crossed a line, and sooner or later, the world was going to find out.